Hey there, movie fans. Welcome to another episode of Rank and File. I'm your host, Scott Movie Mantz. On today's episode, we were going to rank and file the Spider-Man movies. I like or love or really love all of them. Even the movies that are lower on the list, they may have their flaws, but I still do like them. I found things to like about them. So let's get right to it. Number 8 on the rank and file list of Spider-Man movies is The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Release date May 2nd, 2014. Director Mark Webb. Budget $250 million plus. Domestic gross $203 million. Worldwide gross $709 million. Rotten Tomatoes score 51%. 51% makes this the lowest Rotten Tomatoes score and makes this the only Spider-Man movie that is rotten. Here's the problem with The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is that there's too much going on. At the time, Spider-Man was not yet part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, so you couldn't have members of the Avengers pop in and out of the Spider-Man movies. Sony had all the rights to the Spider-Man character for the feature films. What they were trying to do was set up Spider-Man as a cinematic universe unto itself. So the problem with the film is that it serves as setup for too many things that never came to fruition. And instead of being a good movie in its own right, it was all over the place. It was unfocused. It just wasn't a very satisfying film, but it did have its merits. For one thing, the Spider-Man costume itself was a major improvement over its predecessor. I didn't like the Spider-Man costume in the first Amazing Spider-Man film, but I did think that Andrew Garfield was once again a great Peter Parker, a very good Spider-Man. He brought a lot of humor to the Spider-Man character when he was fighting, and that was where he nailed the comic books. Number 7 on the list is The Amazing Spider-Man. Release date July 3rd, 2012. Director Mark Webb. Budget $200 million plus. Domestic gross $262 million. Worldwide gross $758 million. Rotten Tomatoes score 73%. Now, after the Sam Raimi, Tobey Maguire trilogy had run its course, Sony went back to the drawing board to reboot the Spider-Man series. But they rebooted it by telling the origin story again, and that was where The Amazing Spider-Man fell short. We didn't need to see the origin again, and even though it was a little different, it wasn't different enough, and it didn't feel necessary. Andrew Garfield was cast as the new Peter Parker after his success with The Social Network, and he was a darker, more brooding, more angst-ridden Peter Parker than we saw in the Tobey Maguire films, and that did bring it closer to the comics. And I loved his chemistry with Emma Stone, who played Gwen Stacy. Now, here's the irony about Emma Stone. When Emma Stone was first cast, I thought she was going to play Mary Jane because she would have been a great Mary Jane Watson. For proof of that, just go back and watch her movie Easy A. She was basically Mary Jane in that film, and she would have been terrific as Mary Jane, but she was pretty good as blonde Gwen Stacy. But moving up to number 6 on the list, Spider-Man 3. Yes, Spider-Man 3, a movie that I really liked a lot, more than most people. Directed by Sam Raimi. The movie came out May 4th, 2007. Budget $258 million, the most expensive Spider-Man movie of them all, and at that time, the most expensive movie ever made. I know, isn't that crazy? Domestic gross $336.5 million. Worldwide gross $895 million. Rotten Tomatoes score 63%. I like Spider-Man 3 a lot. Yes, there are too many villains. You have the Sandman, you have Venom, you sort of have the Green Goblin with Harry Osborn going after Peter Parker again. There's too much going on in this movie. And then there's the whole middle part when Peter Parker gets all dark and he's dancing down the street. That part was goofy, and a lot of people got turned off to Spider-Man 3 because of that moment. But if you take that moment out of the film, the movie is actually pretty good, and it works in spite of the fact that there are too many villains. I thought that Thomas Hayden Church was great as the Sandman, and the Sandman's transformation into the Sandman was fantastic. I love the villain Venom, but I didn't think that Venom got his due justice in this film. They should have done something much better with Eddie Brock. I like Topher Grace as an actor, but I thought he was miscast as Eddie Brock. But again, I do like the film because the third act of this movie, when Spider-Man has to go back and sort of redeem himself with the city of New York and fight alongside his friend Harry Osborn, I thought that really brought the movie together, and I really thought that brought the entire trilogy of Sam Raimi, Tobey Maguire films together. So yes, Spider-Man 3, number 3 on my list. I like this movie. Would love to hear what you think. Comment below and let me know what you think of Spider-Man 3. Number 5 on the list, Spider-Man Far From Home, directed by John Watts. Release date July 2nd, 2019. Budget $160 million. Domestic gross $390.5 million. Worldwide gross is $1.1 billion, making it the highest grossing Spider-Man movie worldwide and the only Spider-Man film to cross the $1 billion mark worldwide. Rotten Tomatoes score is 91%. Now, Avengers Endgame was the crowning achievement of the Marvel Cinematic Universe after 22 films in that series, and talk about being a tough act to follow. But Spider-Man Far From Home actually did a great job following Avengers Endgame because it was kind of a coda to that movie to see how the world was sort of reeling with the end of certain characters in the Avengers, especially Peter Parker dealing with the loss of his friend and mentor Tony Stark, played by Robert Downey Jr. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of characters to the point where it does feel like Spider-Man is a guest star in his own movie, kind of like with Spider-Man 3, but I still think the movie works. It's a lot of fun, and I loved, finally, seeing one of my very favorite classic Spider-Man villains, Mysterio, on the big screen in a big-budget superhero movie. And he's played really great by Jake Gyllenhaal, who looks like he's having a great time. A big game-changing moment at the end of Far From Home. I don't want to spoil it. If you haven't seen it yet, do check it out. It is a great moment at the end of this movie. Move it up to number 4, Spider-Man, the one that started it all cinematically, the 2002 film, directed by Sam Raimi. The exact release date was May 3rd, 2002. Budget $139 million. Domestic gross $407 million domestic, making it to this day, even almost 20 years later, it is still the highest grossing Spider-Man movie domestically. Worldwide, the movie made $825 million. Rotten Tomatoes score 90%. 2 Oscar nominations for Best Visual Effects and Best Sound. Now, when this movie opened in its 3-day weekend, it was, at that time, the highest opening ever for a movie, $114.8 million. And this really is a game changer for superhero movies, because after the first X-Men film in 2000 kind of kickstarted the whole modern superhero movie moment, Spider-Man took it to another level. And for a big fan like me, it was so great to see Spider-Man swinging through the canyons of New York City in a big budget movie. And Tobey Maguire, talk about being perfectly cast as Peter Parker. Tobey Maguire was playing Peter Parker before he was even cast as Peter Parker. Remember Pleasantville and the Cider House Rules? Now, one thing that this movie has that really made it an iconic moment in films was the upside-down kiss between Peter Parker and Mary Jane. I thought Tobey Maguire and Kirsten Dunst were terrific together in this movie, but that upside-down kiss was really great, really nailed the spirit of the Spider-Man comics. I think the first half of this film, when he becomes Spider-Man, when he's learning how to use his powers, is actually better than the second half of the movie, which becomes kind of like a routine superhero movie. I like Willem Dafoe as the Green Goblin, but I thought that the Green Goblin's motive was a little weak. He just wanted Spider-Man to join him, and kind of that was it. But it's still a lot of fun and still left room for improvement. Moving up to number 3, Spider-Man Homecoming, directed by Jon Watts. Release date July 7th, 2017. Budget $175 million. Domestic gross $334 million. Worldwide gross $880.2 million. Rotten Tomatoes score 92%. They really had a great chance here to bring Spider-Man into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and they finally did that with this movie, which means, guess what? You can have the Avengers pop in and out of the Spider-Man films, and who better to do that than Tony Stark, played by Robert Downey Jr. It is so great. I love the protege-teacher chemistry between Tom Holland, the new Peter Parker, and Robert Downey Jr., and I think this movie is a lot of fun. Jon Watts made this movie feel really, really fresh, revitalizing the Spider-Man series by making it feel like a John Hughes movie, putting Peter Parker back in high school. Michael Keaton was great as the Vulture, and there is a great third act plot twist in this movie that just made me just love this movie even more. Moving up to number 2 on the rank and file list, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Directors Bob Persichetti, Peter Ramsey, and Rodney Rothman. Release date December 14th, 2018. Budget $90 million. Domestic gross $190 million. Worldwide gross $375 million. Rotten Tomatoes score 97%. Oscar winner for Best Animated Feature. This movie is produced by Phil Lord and Chris Miller, the creative geniuses behind the brilliant Lego Movie. Talk about a sensational film by any measure. Into the Spider-Verse is magnificent. It is a masterpiece. There's so many merits. The storytelling is bold and imaginative and inventive. The animation is breathtaking. It makes you feel like you are in a comic book. And what a great way for Peter Parker to pass the baton on to Miles Morales as the new Spider-Man, while showing Peter Parker going through a midlife crisis. This movie has a lot of depth. Plus, it has Peter Porker, the spectacular Spider-Ham. This movie has all the Spider people, and it brings them all together in such a brilliant way. I've said that word already. This movie is brilliant. I love that this movie feels like the It's a Wonderful Life of Spider-Man movies. Here's why. It takes place during Christmas. There's a lot of snow on the ground. Think of Peter Parker as George Bailey. Think of Miles Morales as Clarence. Think of the Kingpin as Mr. Potter. And that brings us to the number 1 Spider-Man movie on the rank and file list. It had to be Spider-Man 2. Release date June 30th, 2004. Director Sam Raimi. Budget $200 million. Domestic gross $374 million. Worldwide gross $789 million. Rotten Tomatoes score 93%. Academy Award winner for Best Visual Effects. 2 additional Oscar nominations for Best Sound Mixing, Best Sound Editing. This is the quintessential Spider-Man movie. You only have one villain, Dr. Octopus, played by the amazing Alfred Molina, but this is more about Peter Parker than it is about Spider-Man. It is a coming-of-age movie about a superhero. I thought Tobey Maguire was absolutely fantastic in this movie. And one of my very, very favorite scenes in the film doesn't even involve Spider-Man. It involves Peter Parker, who goes into a burning building to save a child, even without his powers that he had lost by this point. And he did it because it was in his nature. He was a good guy. He was a hero in his heart. Of course, the action scenes are great. That runaway train sequence at the end was so incredible. There's a lot of depth to this movie. I just thought this movie was a great, pretty much an adaptation of one of the great comic books of all time. Amazing Spider-Man number 50, Spider-Man No More. Some of the storyboards from that comic book are seen on the big screen. Sam Raimi, clearly a big Spider-Man fan. This movie holds up great. I love the scene at the end when Peter Parker and Mary Jane are in his apartment. She goes to save him, and he hears the sirens outside, and she looks at him and says, "Go get him, Tiger." What a great ending to a great movie. What a great way to top this list. Spider-Man 2 is the greatest Spider-Man movie of them all. Thanks so much for watching. Comment below on the comments and let me know what you think. Make sure you follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Movie Mantz. Make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel. Lots more great video content coming. And until next time, here's looking at you, kids.